we are going to make sure that you are going to enjoy for this morning's event. So without further ado, I have the honor and the privilege of introducing our workshop facilitator this morning. This guy is a Toastmaster, not only by his words, but really by action and by heart. He lives and breathes Toastmasters. He has been a Toastmaster for 20 years. He celebrated 2 decades of being a Toastmaster in January. And he has achieved the highest distinction a Toastmaster can make. We call it Distinguished Toastmaster. And he did it not once, not twice, but 6 times. So without further ado, my I would always say that I'm his adoptive protege. But I admire this guy, and I know I'm very sure that we are going to learn a lot from him this morning. Let's give it up for DTM, Distinguished Toastmaster Nomel Gilongos.
Thank you very much, Toastmaster Sarah. You have made my day complete today by reading word for word my introduction. Thank you very much. Welcome, fellow Toastmasters. I'm very excited today to talk about effective speaking in spontaneous situations. Earlier, we've been hearing impromptu speaking. Impromptu speaking is essentially spontaneous speaking. But for purposes of allowing the non-Toastmasters in our audience to participate through our program today, we'll try to avoid calling the activity or the workshop an impromptu speaking workshop. Let's use the neutral term spontaneous speaking. It's more common and everybody can immediately identify the definition of spontaneous speaking. All right, so let's get started right away. Jamil, can we share the PowerPoint now? All right, so while Jamil is sharing the screen, I actually have hesitations about today's workshop because to teach impromptu speaking or speaking spontaneously, it is best to do the workshop in person. We have not really tested doing the workshop online, and the biggest challenge here is how to make sure that the participants will be properly engaged, knowing fully well that in order for us to learn the rudiments of spontaneously speaking, we need to actually practice it. But hopefully, we'll be able to do that today with little adjustments, and I will be expecting the cooperation and participation of everybody. So if you're not comfortable standing up or participating in the activities, just tell us. We'll take note of that. And nonetheless, you'll still be participating because there is no way for us to exclude any participant from our activities. All right, but rest assured, no one will be injured in today's exercises. Everything will be done online. Everything will be virtual. All right, so I've also made some changes in the actual title of my presentation. Instead of using thinking on your feet, I decided to call today's presentation Under Pressure because I think it's more visual. Any person who has a challenge, who has a difficulty speaking spontaneously is always under pressure. And today, among other things, we will try to understand how to manage this pressure. We'll discover that this pressure is actually anxiety. And the primary consideration in order for us to truly manage our anxiety in speaking spontaneously is to manage it. And we'll share with you tips and exercises on how to do this. There is no guarantee that at the end of this workshop, you'll become great spontaneous speakers, but I can assure you by the end of this training program, you will have that confidence, at least the initial confidence to wing it out in impromptu speaking or in spontaneous speaking. Okay, so let's get started. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask you all to read this sentence. Okay, and as you read this sentence, please take note that what is important to me is that you count the number of F's, letter F, that you'll find in this sentence, please. Okay? Count the number of F's. Of course, you'll have to keep it quiet since this is online. You'll not be able to speak out yet. Everybody's muted. I'll give you just another couple seconds. All right? 3, 2, 1. Okay. My remote control is not working. Just bear with me. Okay. So, next slide, Jimmy. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Now, using your chat, the chat box, can you tell me, Ray, how many F's do you see? Did you find 3 F's? Okay, let's double check. So a lot of participants today found 4, 6, 4, 5, 2. All right, 6, 4. Wow, amazing. So a lot of you were able to locate 6 F's. Now, for those of you who found less than 6 F's, I'm very sorry. You have a problem. All right? You have a problem because that's exactly the reason why we need to learn the rudiments of spontaneously speaking, because spontaneously speaking is actually closely tied up with our attention, with our ability to look into details. So if you answered 5, 4, 3, 2, then you need today's workshop. If you answered 6, well, you probably don't need the workshop anymore, but stay. You might be able to grab some additional information that can further enhance your ability to speak spontaneously. All right. So for today's session, our goals are basic. Number 1, we'll try to understand speaking spontaneously. Number 2, we'll learn and apply the dynamics of speaking spontaneously. And later on, for the non-Toastmasters in the audience, I will introduce you to Toastmasters table topics, which is the Toastmaster exercise on impromptu speaking. So before we move further, may I ask everybody to answer a quick poll? Jamil, can we please show the poll? Okay, we'll be closing the poll in a few more seconds. All right. So 68% of today's participants, more or less, are aware of Toastmasters. 32%, or around 8 participants, are not aware of Toastmasters. So that means the 8 participants will be our stars of today's program. Okay, so when we talk about spontaneous speaking, we essentially need to be reminded of 3 things. Number 1, as our original title has indicated, we are thinking on our feet. When we say thinking on our feet, simply put, this means we have very little time to prepare. But the truth is, thinking on our feet does not necessarily mean you're not really prepared to speak up. What you do is you draw on the vast experience in your life to respond to situations and questions that are thrown to you, right? Number 2, we need to learn how to spontaneously create ideas so that we can respond to situations and questions. And finally, whether it's prepared speaking or it's spontaneous speaking, we must always ensure that we speak coherently and with confidence. If you cannot speak with coherence and with confidence, you defeat the purpose of speaking. So these 2 elements must always be present when we open our mouth and speak up. Our presentations, our speeches must be structured, must be coherent, must be understandable, must be logical. And whenever we speak up, we need to speak with confidence. We need to show our audience that we are an authority, that we know what we're talking about. So all this can be addressed once we fully understand what's keeping us from speaking spontaneously. In every situation where people are actually asked to stand up and speak spontaneously, whether you are asked to explain something at work, whether you're asked by your parents to explain why you came home late, whether you want to place a cold call if you're into sales, in any situations where there is little time for us to prepare, what stops us from delivering an impressive presentation or speech is essentially anxiety. That nagging fear that we will fail. And why? Because we are actually designed, we human beings are actually designed to strive for perfection. Remember, from our youth, when to the time we graduated, to the time that we have started working professionally, we have always been reminded that we need to be perfect, that we need to be to excel. And excellence is always equated with perfection. And whenever we are reminded that we cannot achieve this, we become anxious. We become fearful. We become hesitant. And the next thing we do is we retreat. We take a step back. We cover our mouth and we refuse to speak. And the problem is actually cultural in nature as well. If you have realized it, if you don't have realized it, we Filipinos always find it difficult to speak spontaneously. Some of us will find it easier to prepare a speech. That's why in Toastmasters, we have members who can easily prepare a written speech, memorize it, and deliver it as if it's the best speech of their lives. But when you push them to speak impromptu, when you push them to speak spontaneously, or you put them on the spot, they always crumble. And why? Because we are always anxious. And this anxiety is brought about by our fear of failing, by our fear of being rejected. We always wanted to be accepted. But is this the correct attitude? We'll find out. Right. So, how do we address anxiety? How do we make sure that we manage our anxiety? By the way, fellow Toastmasters and friends, ladies and gentlemen, there is no cure for anxiety. It's not a disease, an illness that can be medicated. No. What we can do is we can only manage it. If somebody tells you that we can cure and fix your anxiety, that's wrong. But we can definitely manage it. It's almost like controlling the butterflies in your tummy. When you first attempt to speak in public, you are so tense and you're so fearful that you might falter. But as you practice, as you expose yourself to public speaking, you start controlling those butterflies. And although you are still nervous, the nervousness is now rechanneled and is used to serve your purpose. The same is true with anxiety. So number one, we need to acknowledge anxiety. We need to acknowledge that we are afraid of the exercise, of the challenge for us to speak up, to share our thoughts, to express our ideas. Once we are able to acknowledge our fear, our anxiety, we know that we need to address it. We know it exists and we know that we can manage it. But as long as we try to run away from it and deny it and avoid it, every time we are thrust to speak in public, whether prepared or spontaneously, we will always be anxious. So, if you have been avoiding spontaneous speaking, today is the best time for you to stand up and conquer that fear. Next, after you have acknowledged your anxiety, you need to reframe your thoughts. Instead of thinking that you needed to be perfect, that you needed to become an excellent speaker, you need to convince yourself that what you need to do is to simply stand up, organize your thoughts, and share your opinion. Share your ideas. Share your most heartfelt thoughts about the question given to you. And then, after you're able to reframe your situation, your mindset, the next thing is you ask questions. By asking questions, you actually win over your audience. One of the reasons why we are anxious about spontaneous speaking is that we are afraid that our audience will not accept us, or our audience will outright reject our thoughts, or they will disagree with our opinion. Let's do away with that by asking questions. When we start asking questions instead of imposing things on our audience, we start to build relationships. And relationship is what makes a successful interaction. Remember, all forms of spontaneous speaking is dialogic. That means it's a dialogue. In many instances, it's always you and another person, or you and many people. So regardless of how many are in your audience, it's a dialogic relationship. Start asking questions. And then finally, after you learn, all right, after you have asked, after you have acknowledged your anxiety, after you have reframed your mindset, and after you have win over and develop a relationship with your audience by asking questions instead of imposing on them, the last thing that we need to remember is start the conversation. Strike the conversation. If we do not begin speaking and interacting with your audience, with the person, with your target audience, then you will fail. We will fail. So, in order for us to manage our anxiety, we need to go through all these 4 steps. Without any of these steps, if you miss one of these steps, then we will have a problem. So, it is very important that we need to manage our anxiety by learning how to acknowledge our fear, our anxiety, by reframing our mindset, by asking questions to win over our audience. And once we have them on our side, strike that conversation. Start talking to them instead of just sharing and blathering your thoughts. And I can assure you, that's the first step to managing your anxiety. The next step is to start sharing your thoughts. Okay? If you have questions so far, feel free to post your questions on the chat. We'll try to address them as we go on. We'll try to make this workshop as interactive as possible. Okay? So, now, in many researches that were done by academicians, they have found that the best way for some professional speakers to control or to manage their anxiety is for them to do activities. Jamil, can you return the slide? Yes. Right. Some professional speakers, they would do some activities. Some of them would actually sing before an actual presentation. Others would probably go to the gym or do an exercise. But personally, I wouldn't want that. You don't want to appear before your audience all sweaty and smelly. Unless you're doing it online, then nobody can smell you. But otherwise, yeah, to stand before an audience all sweaty and smelly is not really good. It's one factor to discourage them from interacting with you. Some people would sing, other people would try to count backwards from 100 going back to number 1. That's pretty difficult. One of the easiest form of actually preparing yourself or priming yourself for spontaneous speaking is practicing using tongue twisters. So today I have shared with you a very simple tongue twister. I want you to silently read. Wait, before you read the tongue twister, I want you to silently read line per line. All right, read it aloud, and when you read it, listen to yourselves and listen if you would actually say something does not sound good. Okay, there is somewhere there that will not sound good if read wrongly. All right, and then what we'll do, I will select one of you or a couple of you to read it aloud. All right, any volunteer who would like to read this aloud?
Go, guys.
I volunteer here.
Yes, please. I'm sorry I
Hi,
can't see you, but yes, feel free to speak up, please. Can you introduce yourself, please? Just mention your name.
I'm Edna Guevara. Can you hear me?
Hi, Edna. Yes, please.
Morning. Yes. I slit a sheet, I slit, and on that slitted sheet, I sit.
Wonderful, very good. Now, Edna, can you read this a little faster?
I knew you were going to say that. I slit a sheet I slit, and on that slitted sheet, I sit.
All right. Thank you very much, Edna.
You're welcome.
Why is this exercise very good in managing our anxiety? Number one, it would actually remind us of the proper frame of mind. Remember the 4 points that I have mentioned earlier? What's point number 2? Reframing our mindset. If you notice, once you start reading this tongue twister, what you would actually do is first you will tell yourself, I will have to be very careful and read this correctly. That's not reframing your mindset. That's actually going back to the first step of acknowledging your anxiety. You are not actually acknowledging your anxiety. You're actually giving up or giving way to your anxiety. By becoming very, very careful not to commit mistakes, you're actually bound to commit more mistakes. It's a good thing Edna is familiar perhaps with the exercise and might actually be practicing with a lot of tongue twisters as well. So she managed to read it very well. But what I would what I would recommend is when you do exercises like this, make sure not to tell yourself that you wanted to be perfect in reading your tongue twisters. All right, read it. After all, no one will hear you. You will not practice your tongue twisters publicly. You will practice this privately, probably with your spouse, with your children, with your friends. But in many instances, you will practice this privately. So do not be afraid to sound dull. Do not be afraid to commit mistakes because by going through the process, you would actually be able to manage your anxiety. Remember, the objective of the exercise is for us to be aware that we are anxious and we need to manage our anxiety, that we need to reframe our mindset. All right? Are we good with that? So before we proceed, there's a question here about beginning your in Toastmasters. Is it all right to start your spontaneous speech with a question? The quick answer, Julius, is yes. Asking a question as an opener is always a perfect way to engage your audience. So there are many other ways to open a speech, to open your spontaneous speaking. But asking questions is always the best if your intention is to engage your audience. But be aware, however, that if you're going to start with a question, make sure that your question is something that would address the entire audience, not just a portion of your audience. Because if your question is specific to a fraction of the audience, then part of your audience will be alienated. So be careful with the type of questions that you'll be asking. So what are the best questions normally? Questions that would allow them to think. Never ask questions that would allow them to raise their hands or perhaps to answer yes or no. Always ask them questions that would allow them to think, to organize their thoughts. A perfect example is asking them for their possession, for their advice. So normally, let's say a simple example of a question is, fellow Toastmasters or ladies and gentlemen, may I know how many of you here would prefer to practice spontaneous speaking online, or would you still prefer practicing this in person? So allow them to come up with a decision. That's the best form of questions. Let's proceed. Now that we have learned the 4 steps in managing our anxiety, let me just also again call your attention that of the 4 steps, there are 3 things there that are also essential in making sure that we start speaking spontaneously. Remember, the first step is just managing our anxiety. This time, what we need to take the plunge, and we can only do this after we have achieved managing our anxiety. And now we will go back to 3 of the 4 steps so that we can start speaking spontaneously. Again, acknowledgement, and then reframing our mindset, and number 3, questions, asking questions. So let's discuss these 3 things now. When we acknowledge our anxiety, our fear of spontaneous speaking, we need to remind ourselves that, again, as I mentioned earlier, there is nothing to be afraid of. All right? No audience, whether it's a Toastmaster audience or any audience outside Toastmasters, will want you to fail. Always remember that. Your audience will always wish you the best. Why? Because they would rather you standing in front instead of them. And the only way they can ensure that they will not be called to stand in front is for you to succeed. If you fail, chances are next time it will be their turn. But if you succeed, then chances are you'll be the regular speaker. And this applies actually even in our workplace. The person who can express himself freely and coherently and confidently would always be the person who will be asked to serve as hosts or MCs in our corporate programs. They will be always the ones that will be given the opportunity for promotions. They will be given they will always have the back of the decision makers because they they have made themselves visible, and they are visible because people see that they can speak and express themselves. So we go back to acknowledging our hesitations and our fear, accept that it exists, and start managing it. How do we make sure that we actually manage our anxiety and start speaking? Even if you're not sure what will happen, do not be afraid to stand up and volunteer. All right? Unless it will mean that you can be dismissed from work, that you can lose a job, then have second thoughts. But if it will not kill you, take the plunge, take the challenge. It will only make the experience will only make you stronger and better because you will be exposed on an actual opportunity where you can improve yourself. Later on, we'll talk about improvement. So once you have done this, the next thing that you need to do is constantly remind yourself that you need to reframe your mindset. Right? Do not go for a performance. Go for opening up yourself. Right? Many speakers, especially spontaneous speakers, falter because they would rather perform for their audience, impress the audience, instead of opening up, sharing their innermost thoughts, being sincere in their responses. This is true especially for salespeople. Have you noticed how salespeople, especially the great salespeople, how can they easily close sales? Because when they talk to their clients, whether it's a cold call or not, they would make sure that they would put the customer into their shoes. They would put themselves into the shoe of the customer. So the perspective that they would actually be using will be the perspective of the customer. They would talk about the benefit of the product or service they're selling instead of the need for them to close the sale. And the target or the prospective customer will not see the actual attempt to sell. What they'll see is the effort to help you enjoy something or benefit from something. The same reframing of mindset must be practiced by anyone who would love to succeed as a spontaneous. And number three, when we talk about questions, when you're about to start speaking spontaneously, this is about building relationships with your audience. By questions, we mean strike conversations. Instead of simply blabbering and talking about things that you know, let them feel that you are a genuine person, speaking to them, trying to educate them, trying to empower them, trying to inform them. Remember, there are several objectives for speaking, for communicating. We need to make sure that any of these objectives would be relayed to your target audience. Okay, so before we proceed, I have a quick exercise for all of you. So this time, we will break you out into pairs, all right? We will randomly place you in a breakout room. There will be two of you there, all right? Assign a person who will be speaker one and assign a person who will be speaker two, okay? Speaker one will be the first to speak up. Speaker two will listen, and then speaker two, after that, switch. Speaker two will do the speaking, and speaker one will respond. All right, to make things more exciting, this is our situation, okay? This is called gift giving. So, the first speaker would receive a gift from speaker number two. And you have a required spills, okay? So, speaker number one, the first speaker will begin his or her speech by saying, "Thank you very much for this gift of," and then tell speaker number two the gift that you have received. All right? No right or wrong answers. the first thing that comes to your mind is the gift that you have received. All right. Now, those things that you are thinking now, they are not the first thing that comes to your mind, okay? Not even that second thing. The first thing that would come to your mind once you are in the breakout room, okay? So right now, do not think yet of the gift, all right? Listen to the instructions first. And then, after you have mentioned the gift, speaker number 2 would acknowledge you by saying, "Thank you. I'm glad you are happy you have received this because," and then give your explanation. Are we clear? If the instructions are not clear, please say so in the chat. After you have done the exercise, switch. Speaker number 2 will begin, and then speaker number 1 will respond. All right, repeat. The spiel. First speaker will say, "Thank you very much for the gift of," and then tell speaker number 2 what gift you have received from him or from her. After you have said that, speaker number 2 will say, "Thank you too. I'm very happy you love the gift because," and then explain why you have given speaker number 1 that gift. Okay, so the first spiel is, "Thank you very much for the gift of." Speaker 2 will say, "Thank you too. I'm very happy you love the gift because." All right, are we ready? We will put you into breakout rooms. There will be pairs only. That means 2 of you per room. We will give you 4 minutes to complete the exercise. Afterwards, you will be automatically brought back to the main room. All right? Ready? Sarah and our host, let's start the breakout.
So for JP, Teresita, and Lara, are you able to join your breakout room? Maybe we'll just have to make it better for the next activity.
I'll make you host later.
All
Hello.
right.
Okay, everybody's not back. They're showing the breakout sessions. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, how was it? Were you cheating? Have you thought of your gift even before the breakout room? Were you thinking while you are being transported to your breakout room, or you thought of the gift on the spot?
On
On the spot. Very
on
good.
the spot.
Edna, nice to see you. I've missed you. All right, special mention. All right, so the purpose of this exercise is actually to allow us to experience not only gift giving. Gift giving is always good. It always makes our heart grow fonder. But the purpose of the actual exercise is to put us in a situation where we are forced to speak spontaneously. And for Filipinos, giving gifts and receiving gifts would actually be a very normal activity. We can do this on a daily basis. We can receive all forms of gifts. But have you noticed how difficult it is for us to actually express our appreciation of the gifts? We are actually thinking of the best way to thank the giver instead of just saying outright, "Oh, thank you for this." We're trying to please them. That's not the purpose of spontaneous speaking. When you speak spontaneously, set aside pleasing your audience. If there's somebody that you need to please, it has to be yourself first. And you can only do that by allowing yourself to, again, acknowledge your anxiety, your fear of failure, of rejection. Reframe your mindset. Do not prepare in advance. After all, it's spontaneous speaking. If you prepare for spontaneous speaking, it's already extemporaneous. If you prepare thoroughly, it's already prepared. So it's spontaneous. It's very little to no preparation. And then strike the conversation. Ask questions. By asking questions, you build relationship with your audience, with the other party, and create a conversation. That's how you succeed in spontaneous speaking. Okay.
Well
So
said, well said.
any anyone who would like to share their experience during our breakout session? Yeah, my partner was actually Jocelyn Toledo, and she's not a Toastmaster, but she did very well, very spontaneous. She gave me a box of donuts. All right, so if there are no questions, Jamil, can we share our screen back and let's proceed? Earlier, I talked about improv, right? Improv actually started as a device or a form of a comedy presentation, theater. It's actually a theater experience that allows the actors to perform without a script. Or if there is a script, it's actually just a guideline. It's not even a bullet point. It's just a general background, guideline, a framework, and then they allow the actors to go through the entire presentation. Improv now has actually become a tool for spontaneous speaking as well. If you wanted to become a very confident and a very coherent spontaneous speaker, I would recommend that you look into the elements of improv, because according to one of the most famous Toastmaster world champions, Darren Lacroix, improv is actually a means for a person to improve. Okay, so let me share with you four things why improv can really help us become a very good spontaneous speakers. All right, so number one, get out of your own way. Number two, opportunity, not a threat. Number three, slow down and listen. Number four, structured response. All right, let's discuss these four items, four elements of improv one by one. When we say get out of our own way, actually, I've been discussing this earlier, but I have not used the exact phrase or the exact statement, get out of your own way. Remember when we talk about acknowledging your anxiety and reframing your mindset? This is exactly what I meant by that. You need to get out of your own way. The reason we fail or we find it difficult to speak impromptu or speak spontaneously, it's because we are blocking our own growth. We are blocking our own opportunity. We always think of the difficulties. We always think of failures. We always try to think of perfection, of excellence, instead of plunging into the exercise so that we can actually. We need to get out of our own way and allow ourselves to experience everything. If we fail, fail, but bounce back and learn from the mistakes. If our first attempt at spontaneous speaking is not as successful as how we wanted it to be, that's fine. That's a learning curve. Do not allow yourselves to be discouraged by our false starts, by the difficulties and the challenges. It's part of the learning experience. So get out of the way and just go for it. Number two, look at spontaneous speaking as an opportunity, not as a threat. The reason why, especially for Filipinos, we are always afraid of spontaneous speaking because we always wanted to be prepared. We always wanted to make sure that we will not be criticized, that we will be able to deliver. Again, that concept of being perfect, right? Sabi nga ni Lea Salonga, if I may speak in the vernacular, sorry na lang, hindi ako perfect. So this is actually a problem. We always view our opportunities not as an opportunity, but as a difficulty. We view them as threats. For as long as this is our mindset, we will not overcome the anxiety of speaking in public, of speaking spontaneously. And even if you are the best prepared speaker, you will discover that you will have difficulties and challenges in spontaneous speaking simply because you view them as a threat. My challenge for you is embrace all the opportunity to speak spontaneously as an opportunity for you to become a better speaker, a better person, a better leader. By doing that, you'll change your mindset. You will now start learning and improving. Guaranteed. Number three, slow down and listen. If you notice, for most of us who are finding it difficult to speak spontaneously, the reason primarily is because we do not pay attention. We try to ram our way through everything because we are actually not speaking, we are not really speaking spontaneously. We're actually prepared to speak something, to share something. We try to ram it down to our audience. So we rush. We are always in haste. Stop. Stop for a while. Slow down and start paying attention to your audience. Are they still listening to you? Are they nodding? Are they checking their clock? So look for these signals so that you will know how to react to your audience. Right? Slow down. I can assure you, if you slow down, all right, you'll be able to respond properly and correctly to your audience. And you can start listening to them. And number four, we must always make sure that whenever we speak spontaneously, we must speak with a structured response. What is a structured response? It must be a complete speech. A complete speech is a speech with a clear opening, the body of the speech, and a conclusion. You cannot just simply say yes. While yes can be a complete sentence, it's not a structured response. All right. In Toastmasters, our impromptu exercise is around 1 to 2 minutes. In real life, a spontaneous speech can range from 30 seconds to hours. So you need to be prepared for short and long spontaneous speaking opportunities. And make sure that you are always able to respond with a structured response. All right? All these four elements are elements that are actually taught in improv acting and can really help us become very good spontaneous speakers. So if you have time, if you are into theater as well, look into these things and it will help you. Yes, this is Darren Lacroix. He actually has a DVD called Improve to Improve. If you can find a copy, watch it. You'll learn more from Darren Lacroix. He's one of the best comedians who successfully transformed himself into a sought after public speaker. He's actually a world champion of public speaking in Toastmasters. He won on his first attempt at competitions. That's how good he is. And we can learn so much from Darren Lacroix. Now that we have mentioned about the structured response, let's talk about actual responding, actual speaking. Earlier, we just talked about theories and principles of spontaneous speaking. Now, let's go into the nitty gritty of actually standing up and speaking. How do we respond? What are the things we need to remember when responding, when speaking spontaneously? There are 3 points that I'd like to share with you. Number one, practice. If this is your first time to speak spontaneously and you're not happy with it, do not stop. As I mentioned, that's normal. That's a learning curve. What you do is assess your performance. Okay, let me correct myself. Do not Let's not call that performance. Assess your response and look into ways on how you can improve yourself. And then, although this is spontaneous speaking, preparation can actually be very effective. But how do you prepare for spontaneous speaking when you don't know the topic, when you don't know the situation or the questions? Preparation can actually be in the form of building up your self-confidence. And how do you do that? By just speaking. Talk to everyone. When you talk to your spouse, be conscious of how you speak with your spouse. Listen to yourself. When you talk to your children, pay attention. How do you communicate with them? Always be conscious of how you actually interact with other people. That's part of your learning, of your training to become an effective spontaneous speaker. And finally, always remember, regardless whether you're a Toastmaster or not, always remember a spontaneous speech, a spontaneous response is always a real, proper speech, and it should be structured as such. So when we say structured response or structured speech, it must be a complete speech with a clear opening, the body of the speech, and a conclusion. If you're not a Toastmaster, don't worry, we'll teach you how to structure response. If you are a Toastmaster, you have heard of this before, but we'll have more exercises later on. So, next question. How do we make sure that we are ready for spontaneous speaking? One of the usual advice by professional speakers is that you need to keep yourself informed. And how do you keep yourself informed? All right. You can keep up with the news, read the news, but beware, in this age of ours, there is a proliferation of fake news. Do not share and promote fake news. Always confirm and validate the information that you will be sharing as well. You can have a repertoire of anecdotal stories. So what I usually do is whenever I interact with people, whenever I read or listen to stories, I try to listen for interesting stories, stories that interest me. Because I will never share story that will not interest me. Why? Sharing story that do not interest the stories that do not interest you will will not make you a sincere speaker. So only select speak stories and only share stories that you are interested with as well. That's the reason why I will never talk about probably I will never talk about automotive because I don't like driving and I don't drive. I have a very poor eyesight and therefore I can never drive. And because of that, I will never be interested in anything automotive. Yes, I can talk about cars, but I would rather not because I'm just not interested. But I can talk about food. I can talk about traveling. I can talk about love, relationships. So these are the things that interest me, and I can talk about these things. And when I speak about them, people will see that I am sincere and I am interested in my topics, right? And then commit to memory, a small array of witty or inspirational quotes. I am always impressed with speakers who can immediately drop off quotations, especially quotations that are not as popular. Remember, there are quotations that we have heard thousand times. Whenever we hear them, they no longer impress us. But I am always impressed by a person who can always give share a quotation that is completely unknown, but from somebody that I can validate, that I can confirm, right? And also keep snippets of jokes or puns that you can use if you have the knack for humor. Again, humor is perhaps one of the most difficult skills that we can acquire. But again, humor is both a talent and a skill. If you do not have the talent to make people laugh, do not worry, you can develop that. But if you have been developing your humorous speaking skills and you still do not succeed, probably you can reconsider your options. Or probably your training for your training is incorrect. You have to change your methods, right? Because it is a skill that can be acquired. I have seen a lot of people who are never funny, but because of their training, they become very, very humorous speakers. Now, what I want you to do is using the chat, tell me, share your ideas on how you can further beef up your arsenal of knowledge so that you can have a pool of information to beef up your spontaneous speaking. So I've shared four things here. Are there any other ways you can actually build on your stockpile of knowledge and information? Yep, read books. Yes, definitely. Watch documentaries. Perfect. Yes, definitely. Yes, watch news. But again, remember, be careful with fake news. Yes, keep learning, of course. Podcast. Yes, it's very accessible now. Yes, good ideas. How about listening to chismes? Yeah, I agree. Networking. By the way, gossips and idle talk, they might sound like counterproductive, but sometimes you'll be surprised. You can get something out of them. If not the actual stories, but the behavior, the reactions of the people involved indulge in idle talk. There's always something to learn from anybody. Yep, champions, watching champions, learn from experienced persons. Yes, yes. Keep on conversing with others. Yep, very good suggestions. All these are correct. There are no wrong answers when your objective is to stockpile on your knowledge and information that you can actually use for your spontaneous speaking. So my recommendation, ladies and gentlemen, do not stop. Keep on beefing up your arsenal of knowledge and info. You'll never know when you can actually use them. And for all you know, you can actually even use them for a more for the prepared speeches that you need to prepare, for the long um, write-ups that you need to prepare. So there would always be a use for them. Yeah, finally, yes, I agree. TED Talks. If you want ideas that are definitely worth sharing, go for TED Talks. They have a huge database now of amazing speeches. from amazing individuals. All right. Okay, let's move on. So if you have other ideas, just post them on the chat. We'll be saving the chat. We'll try to compile this and send this all to all participants. Right? I'll be preparing a handout that we will be sending to you later on. The handout will include the responses that we have received from the chat and from the questions as well. All right. So before we proceed, let's pause for a exercise. If you can look at the image on our screen now, do you see a rabbit or do you see a duck? Using the chat again, can you tell us what you actually see? Syempre, yeah, both. So, what is the point of this exercise? Perspectives, ladies and gentlemen. So, in spontaneous speaking, it's always about perspectives. There is nothing for you to worry about. There is no right or wrong answers for as long as you are speaking about a perspective. Unless your spontaneous speech is about an information, and information can either this or that only, then any other information, any other knowledge or idea that you'll be sharing is defined by your perspective. Whether you agree or disagree, whether you are in favor or not, whether you like or dislike, these are all perspectives. But if you talk about merely sharing information, then you have to be very careful with that. That's also the reason why personally I avoid delivering informative speeches. I would rather deliver motivational speeches, inspirational speeches. I would rather deliver humorous speeches, but not informative speeches, because our responsibility as informative speakers is higher than any other communication objectives, other communication method. Information must always be validated. So if we share wrong info, we are actually providing a disservice to our audience. And that is unethical. And that should not be encouraged.